All right, it's sort of feeling like fall here in Massachusetts, which means that in an election year, it's probably primary day because Massachusetts will sometimes have very, very late primaries. And indeed, yesterday, September 1st, was primary day here in Massachusetts, and it was basically a good night for incumbents. We followed a lot of these individual races, which I'm going to go through with you, which had prominent primary races in the Senate, in the House of Representatives. We even interviewed one of the candidates last week. And overall, if you were hoping to see incumbents upset, you did not see it yesterday. So let's go through some of these races. First and foremost, we had incumbent Democratic Senator Ed Markey defeat challenger Joe Kennedy III. Joe Kennedy III, of course, a congressman who is giving up his seat in the House. We'll talk about who won the primary for that House seat a little later. But Ed Markey winning solidly 55-44 with about 1.2 million votes cast. But still, I mean, listen, all that matters is who wins in the end. But 44% for a challenger to an incumbent Democratic senator in the state of Massachusetts, particularly one who's relatively well liked, is not nothing. So, it's like that when you lose, you've lost. And saying Joe Kennedy can feel good about 44%, it's kind of dumb, feels stupid to say it. But this is not 80-20, 55-44. Ed Markey will retain his spot at the top of the Democratic ticket and presumably will be reelected in November. I did vote for Markey. I received questions about this a number of times during live calls. And for me, what it fundamentally came down to was the case being made for why Kennedy should replace Markey was not a solid one for me. There was the idea that Kennedy is more progressive. And when I looked at the issues, particularly on climate and in other places, I just didn't see it. And to say, let's remove someone who now has built some seniority in the Senate for someone else, basically for what feels like the argument that he's younger, Joe Kennedy, 39 years old, and Markey in his 70s, it felt like a weak case. And so I ultimately did vote for Ed Markey, and that's not a secret. I mentioned that on the program a number of times before. In my sort of former congressional district, because I don't live in that area anymore, but also the lines have been redrawn. In any case, my former congressman, Richard Neal, the incumbent, facing a solid primary challenge from Holyoke Mayor Alex Morse, Holyoke, Massachusetts Mayor Alex Morse. I met Alex Morse more than a decade ago. We interviewed him on the program when he was running for and had won the mayorship of Holyoke, Massachusetts. He was also on the program last week. He did not prevail. Ultimately, the incumbent Richard Neal won. It wasn't super close, 59-41. Again, you can say great job by Alex getting 41% of the vote. But it was not really close. There was polling going into this one that said it was within 5 points, and the margin of error was a few points there. So you could argue that there was polling saying that this was effectively a statistical tie, maybe. But in the end, 59-41 there, and Richard Neal will certainly be reelected in November. Then we had a three-way race for Joe Kennedy's vacated seat. So this is the Democratic primary for who will be on the ballot in November for Joe Kennedy's seat, which he is vacating in order to run against Ed Markey, losing yesterday, of course. And there, an incredibly close race. Jesse Mermel just barely defeating Jake Auchincloss, 22.4 to 22.3. Now, that was only a 105 vote margin, incredibly, with Becky Grossman in third place with about 17.5% of the vote. And then we had incumbent Stephen Lynch, one of the more, I think it's fair to say, centrist Democrats in the House, defeating challenger Robbie Goldstein. That one even less close than the Alex Morse-Richard Neal race, Lynch winning 66-34, which is very close to a 2-1 margin. So that one was not close, although Goldstein did generate some level of interest and enthusiasm in the district in Massachusetts. Now, one other primary of interest yesterday there's this wacky conspiracy theorist who was running for the Republican primary for the Senate. So this would be which Republican will be on the ballot in November against Ed Markey. And this Dr. Eva Ayyadurai is a doctor who falsely claimed to have invented email, spread disinformation about coronavirus, promoted unfounded COVID treatments. I mean, really like a wacky, I don't want to say Alex Jones-like, but certainly shades of Alex Jones. Dr. Shiva lost the Republican primary to Kevin O'Connor, 60-39. So O'Connor will be on the ticket against Markey in November. Now, to give you a sense of the lopsided nature of Massachusetts, even though Republican presidential candidates get in the high 30s to low 40s, right? So it's lopsided, but you still have a sizable Republican population in Massachusetts. There were only 225,000 votes cast in the Republican Senate primary compared to more than 1.2 million votes in the Democratic Senate primary. And by every indication, Ed Markey will easily defeat Kevin O'Connor in November. But you've got to vote. You've got to vote. There's a reason we don't go by polls and we actually hold the elections. Near my dad's house for the last several months, I've been driving by a house with a sign that says Dr. Shiva, and I always cringe when I drive past it. I'm hoping it's going to be taken down very, very soon. But overall, some of the latest primaries leaning in the direction of the Democratic incumbents, some more progressive, some less progressive, and we now know who will be on the ballot in November. Joe Biden leading overwhelmingly here in Massachusetts. Some polls say it's a lead in the 20s, high 20s. Some polls say it's a lead in the 30s for Joe Biden. But we've got to run up the score. Every Massachusetts voter should vote. We must run up the score. And in fact, that's sort of what I want to talk about next.